Rome burns, not from enemy swords, but from the insatiable hunger for power within. The death of Nero tore the heart from the eternal city, leaving its throne empty and its streets drenched in fear. Four men would rise, one after another, each gambling with the fate of an empire. Loyalties shattered, armies clashed, and the shadow of chaos spread over every corner of Rome. In this year of turmoil, only one man's cunning would restore order. But at what cost to the soul of the city? Watch as Rome teeters on the edge of annihilation, where ambition ignites civil war and loyalty becomes a deadly gamble. Stay with us to witness the rise and fall of emperors and discover how one man reshaped an empire. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. The death of Nero sent a shudder through the very foundations of Rome. The city, once a monument to imperial glory, now quaked with fear and uncertainty. Streets that had known triumph and celebration became silent corridors of suspicion. Senators whispered in shadowed halls, their eyes darting like hunted prey. Guards and soldiers, once devoted to the empire, questioned which banner they would follow, or whether any banner could still hold meaning in a city so adrift. No throne awaited with stability. No council could restore the delicate balance of power. Rome, mistress of the known world, found herself naked before the ambitions of men who craved dominion more than the welfare of the people. In the Forum, echoes of Nero's extravagance lingered like ghosts, banquets and games now replaced by rumors of revolt, of treachery, of blood to come. Citizens whispered of famine and fear, of armies marching not to defend the empire, but to secure a fleeting crown for their general. In the distant provinces, commanders of the legions sensed opportunity. Galba, the first to claim the vacant throne, seized the chance with a calculated coldness. Yet even as he moved toward power, murmurs of betrayal followed like a storm cloud over the Tiber. Rome's heart beat with panic. Every citizen, every soldier, every senator was a potential conspirator, a potential victim. Alliances formed in haste and crumbled in the same breath. The city itself became a battlefield before armies even met, its walls a cage of intrigue and fear. And so the stage was set for a tragedy of unparalleled scope. No foreign invader threatened the gates. No barbarian horde waited beyond the horizon. The enemy was Rome itself. Ambition became the sharpest sword, greed the deadliest poison. Galba's rise was swift yet unstable. Otho, embittered by the slowness of fortune, plotted and moved, and soon the eternal city saw its first clash of emperors within the heart of its own empire. Each step toward power was drenched in the blood of loyalty betrayed. Families were torn apart. Legions turned against brothers in arms, and the people of Rome were left to witness the collapse of everything they had once held sacred. The streets, normally alive with the bustle of markets and processions, echoed with cries of confusion, terror, and grief. Temples became sanctuaries not for prayer, but for hiding. The very fabric of Roman society unraveled, thread by fragile thread, as fear and ambition wove a tapestry of chaos. In the midst of this darkness, the city waited for salvation that seemed ever distant. Rome's citizens, hardened by centuries of conquest and resilience, could do nothing but watch as the pillars of their civilization cracked. The golden age of peace, once so assured under the Caesars, had evaporated in a single year. The power vacuum left by Nero's death was a gaping wound, and the eternal city bled. By the time the first emperor fell and the second rose, it became clear the year would belong to chaos. No man could hold Rome without paying the highest price. No army could claim victory without spilling Roman blood. The death of one tyrant had set in motion a cycle of civil war that threatened to consume not just the city, but the soul of the empire itself. Rome, the eternal city, faced a reckoning. Its destiny was no longer written by the Senate, nor by tradition, nor by the gods. It would be written by the ambition of four men, each desperate, each cunning, each willing to gamble everything on the roll of fate. In the shadows of the Forum and along the banks of the Tiber, the stage for tragedy was complete, and the dice of destiny were cast. From the ashes of Nero's tyranny rose men whose names would be forever etched in the annals of Rome. though not all for glory, nor all for honor. The death of a tyrant had left the empire untethered, and the stage was set for a deadly contest of wills, ambition, and cunning. Four men, each staking his claim to the ultimate prize, emerged from the shadows of history, turning a single year into a crucible that would test the very soul of Rome. First came Galba, the elderly governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, stern, disciplined, and unyielding. He was a man shaped by duty rather than indulgence. Yet in the vacuum left by Nero, Galba's discipline became a double-edged sword. He moved swiftly to claim the throne, declaring himself emperor before the news of Nero's demise could settle into the streets of the capital. His supporters hailed him as a restorer of order, a man who could stabilize an empire frayed by decadence and fear. But the very rigidity that had guided his governorship alienated those who sought not duty but profit, those who measured loyalty in coins and favors rather than in honor. Galba's ascent was triumphant yet precarious, like a tower built too quickly on sand. No sooner had Galba taken the throne than Otho, a man of charm, cunning, and unquenchable ambition, rose to challenge him. Otho had once been a friend to Galba, a confidant, even a supplicant for favor, yet loyalty gave way to desire. He cast his eyes upon the throne with a calculating fire, rallying those disillusioned with Galba's austerity. The streets of Rome murmured with anticipation and dread as Otho's conspirators moved in silence, undermining the foundations of the emperor's fragile reign. With swift precision, Otho orchestrated Galba's assassination, proving that ambition, when paired with decisiveness, could topple even the most disciplined of men. Vitellius, governor of Germania Inferior, then emerged as the next contender. His armies, battle-hardened and fiercely loyal to their general, marched upon Rome with the confidence born of bloodied victories and unwavering discipline. Vitellius was a man of appetites as vast as his ambition, a figure both formidable and grotesque, whose presence commanded both fear and awe. His troops, motivated less by ideology than by the promise of reward, surged forward like a living tide, ready to consume all opposition. The eternal city, already weakened by betrayal and bloodshed, braced itself for another cycle of chaos, each citizen questioning who would rule and whether the city would survive the ambition of yet another emperor. Amidst this maelstrom of betrayal, ambition, and civil war, a quieter figure began to rise. A man whose claim to the throne was not forged in flamboyance, nor demanded through spectacle, but through patience, strategy, and a deep understanding of the fractured Roman state. Vespasian, a general from the distant province of Judea, had fought Rome's enemies with unwavering skill, yet he had never sought the crown for vanity. Observing the chaos from afar, he recognized that Rome did not require another flamboyant ruler, another gambler of fate. Rome required a restorer, a builder, a man who could knit together a city torn apart by ambition and blood. Vespasian's rise was subtle yet inexorable. While Galba, Otho, and Vitellius waged war in the streets and courts of Rome, Vespasian cultivated loyalty in the provinces, among soldiers who valued stability over glory. He offered not empty promises, but structure and reward, a vision of an empire where discipline and prosperity could coexist. Letters and envoys moved like silent messengers of destiny, binding legions to a cause greater than the whims of a single emperor. By the time Vitellius advanced upon Rome with his army, Vespasian's forces were ready, not to confront merely a man, but to confront chaos itself. The eternal city, battered by intrigue and betrayal, now witnessed the quiet genius of a leader who understood that true power is measured not by the speed of conquest, but by the endurance of loyalty. Vespasian's approach was not flamboyant, it was strategic. He consolidated resources, built alliances with provincial governors, and won the hearts of troops whose swords had once been for hire. Where others relied on terror and spectacle, he relied on trust and calculation. By the time the decisive confrontation approached, Vespasian's patience had transformed into an unstoppable force, one that would ultimately bend the fate of Rome to his will. Yet even as Vespasian's star rose, the city remained a tinderbox. Otho, Vitellius, and the remnants of Galba's supporters clashed in brutal encounters. each battle staining Rome's streets with the blood of brothers and comrades. The Eternal City, once a beacon of civilization, became a theater of carnage. Citizens hid behind shuttered doors, merchants abandoned markets, and the cries of the wounded echoed from the Forum to the Palatine. In these grim hours, the heroism of soldiers and the cunning of generals were matched only by the suffering of the people, who bore witness to the relentless human cost of ambition unchecked. In the shadows of Rome's suffering, Vespasian's rise was almost invisible, but profoundly inexorable. Each step he took was measured, each move calculated to secure not only victory, but the survival of an empire. By the end of the year, after Otho's defeat by Vitellius and Vitellius's eventual downfall at the hands of Vespasian's legions, a pattern emerged. Rome did not belong to the reckless, nor to the impulsive, nor to the indulgent. Rome belonged to those who understood its fragility, who could see beyond the lust for immediate power to the enduring strength of governance and loyalty. Thus, in a single year, 4 men gambled with the soul of Rome. Each rise and fall was a testament to ambition, courage, and the peril of unchecked desire. And at the heart of it all, Vespasian emerged, not merely as a victor of battles, but as a symbol of reason and restoration in a city that had teetered on the brink of destruction. The Eternal City had witnessed its darkest hours, yet in the rise of one measured, calculating man, it glimpsed the first rays of a new dawn. Rome, the Eternal City, no longer stood as a symbol of unshakable power. Its foundations, once cemented by centuries of law, tradition, and conquest, now trembled beneath the weight of ambition and betrayal. The empire, sprawling and magnificent, began to fracture from within, its legions loyal not to ideals or to the Senate, but to whoever promised them wealth, glory, or survival. Gold, not honor, dictated allegiance. Silver coins clinked louder than oaths of fealty, and the streets echoed with whispers of treachery in every corner. The legions, once the unyielding backbone of Roman might, became instruments of chaos. Soldiers had been trained to uphold Rome's supremacy, to defend the provinces, to conquer and civilize. Yet in this year of turmoil, the very armies that had spread Rome's dominion now turned inward. Provinces teetered on the brink of revolt as generals sold their loyalty to the highest bidder. In Germania, Hispania, and the Danube, governors and commanders weighed alliances against coin, pledging themselves first to ambition, then to survival. Rome's strength, forged over centuries of conquest, now lay at the mercy of greed and fickle loyalty. The city itself mirrored the disorder of its empire. In the Forum, the heart of Roman politics, senators and magistrates scrambled to secure alliances, fearing betrayal not from the barbarians beyond the walls, but from their fellow Romans. Every corner of the city became a stage for plots, every hallway a corridor of suspicion. Merchants shuttered their stalls, citizens hid behind doors, peering anxiously through narrow windows as rumors of assassinations and coups ran like wildfire. Rome had become a city of shadows, its streets a labyrinth of fear, its populace trapped in a web of uncertainty. Galba's brief reign, though initially welcomed as a restoration of discipline, soon crumbled under the weight of discontent. His austere policies alienated not only the people but also the military, who hungered for rewards rather than restraint. Otho's swift usurpation of the throne underscored the fragility of authority in Rome. The message was clear. Power belonged to those daring enough to seize it, not those wise enough to govern. And yet, as Otho's forces clashed with Vitellius, the city was engulfed in waves of violence, each battle leaving scars on the marble streets, each victory measured in human suffering rather than triumph. Rome's provinces fared no better. The distant legions, cut off from central control, pledged allegiance according to their commanders' whims. In Germania, Vitellius's army marched with devastating efficiency, motivated by promises of reward rather than ideals. In Hispania and Britain, troops faced uncertainty as news of imperial instability rippled through the ranks. Every province, every legion, became a microcosm of the chaos consuming the empire. Loyalty was transactional. Courage was measured by survival. Honor, once the hallmark of Rome, became an afterthought drowned in the clamor of ambition. Even the common citizens felt the tremors of internal collapse. Markets that once thrived with trade fell silent as fear overtook routine. Families, unsure of which ruler would hold power, even for a day, prepared for the worst. Bread became scarce. Whispers of rebellion and revolt turned neighbor against neighbor. The eternal city, famed for its grandeur and order, now appeared vulnerable and fragile, a giant teetering on the brink of ruin. Rome's majesty was no longer in its monuments or armies, but in the fragile hope that stability might yet return. Amid this internal tempest, betrayal became commonplace. Senators who had sworn loyalty to Galba turned to Otho. Otho's supporters shifted allegiance to Vitellius. Even Vitellius's armies faced defection in the shadow of Vespasian's rise. Each betrayal weakened Rome further, stripping the empire of unity and resolve. The city's famed engineering, its aqueducts, forums, and temples, seemed to mock the chaos consuming its people. Marble and stone bore silent witness to the fragility of human ambition when untethered from duty. Rome's collapse was not instantaneous, but cumulative. Each act of greed, each assassination, each betrayal adding to the weight of instability. The Senate debated endlessly, powerless to enforce authority, while the common people suffered in silence. Soldiers who had once been Rome's shield now became agents of destruction, marching, pillaging, and executing with only fleeting allegiance to the empire they had sworn to defend. Within a single year, Rome had become both battlefield and casualty, a city at war with itself. And yet, in the heart of this turmoil, seeds of resolution quietly germinated. Amid the chaos, Vespasian observed the fractures of empire, recognizing that Rome's survival depended not on flamboyant displays of power, but on measured action, discipline, and the careful cultivation of loyalty. While the city burned in ambition and blood, he prepared his legions not for reckless conquest, but for the restoration of order. The contrast between the destructive chaos of Galba, Otho, and Vitellius and the deliberate patience of Vespasian would soon define the fate of Rome itself. By the end of this year, Rome had endured more than a mere change of rulers. It had suffered a test of its very essence. Its armies, once proud instruments of imperial will, had become tools of personal ambition. Its people, once confident in the eternal strength of their city, now feared for survival. Its institutions, once the pillars of law and governance, had been shaken to the core. Rome was alive but fragile, scarred by the consequences of ambition and the merciless calculus of power. The empire's heart had been shattered, and yet somewhere beyond the horizon, a force of stability, cunning, and patience prepared to knit the fragments back together. The eternal city had survived, but only just. Chaos had raged unchecked for months, and the empire had trembled under the weight of internal collapse. Rome's majesty endured, not because it had been spared, but because history had yet to reveal the hand that would restore it. In the shadow of betrayal and bloodshed, the stage was now set for a decisive confrontation, one that would determine whether Rome would crumble entirely or rise anew from the ashes. Rome had no foreign invader to blame. Its enemies wore the faces of its own citizens, its own soldiers, its own senators. The eternal city, once a beacon of civilization and unity, had become a labyrinth of suspicion and betrayal. The streets whispered of plots. The walls echoed with the marching of legions loyal only to ambition. The Forum had transformed from a center of debate into a theater of deadly intrigue. Rome was at war with itself, and in this conflict, every ally could be an adversary, every brother a potential assassin. Otho, Vitellius, and the remnants of Galba's supporters embodied the internal threat. Their ambitions did not merely seek power, they sought the obliteration of rivals, the silencing of opposition, the domination of Rome through force and fear. Otho's swift coup had demonstrated that loyalty was a fleeting commodity, bought and sold with whispers and gold. Vitellius's army, seasoned and ruthless, moved with devastating efficiency, conquering not foreign lands but Rome itself. Each general became an embodiment of peril, a force whose ambition eclipsed conscience, and whose strategy relied on sowing terror as much as achieving victory. The citizens of Rome watched as their city became a crucible for human ambition. Markets once vibrant with life fell silent. Temples meant for prayer and reflection were now refuges for the terrified. Families barricaded themselves behind doors, fearful that a knock at the gate could mean execution or abduction. The legions, no longer disciplined guardians of the empire, became instruments of destruction, their swords guided by desire for immediate gain rather than loyalty to Rome. The enemy was everywhere, in the palace, in the Senate, in the heart of every legionary. Even within the army, danger was omnipresent. Soldiers who had once pledged their swords to a general now weighed allegiance against immediate reward. A commander might promise victory to one faction, then betray them for a higher offer. The loyalty of men, once steadfast, had become a variable, a number on the balance sheet of power. Roman discipline, pride, and honor were undermined by greed and fear, leaving the empire vulnerable to annihilation, not from without, but from within. The struggle for supremacy was brutal and unrelenting. Otho's supporters clashed with those of Vitellius in skirmishes across the city, each confrontation staining Rome with blood. The streets became a battlefield where no citizen was safe, where the cries of the innocent mingled with the roar of combat. Gladiatorial arenas and forums, once centers of spectacle and governance, were transformed into arenas of slaughter and political theater. The eternal city, famed for its grandeur, now seemed almost fragile in the shadow of human ambition unleashed. In this deadly struggle, even former allies turned against one another. Senators who had once supported Galba plotted Otho's downfall. Otho's ministers betrayed him to Vitellius. Vitellius' legions faced desertions and mutinies in the shadow of Vespasian's rise. Rome's very institutions had been weaponized, manipulated by those who understood that control of the throne meant control of life and death itself. No law, no tradition, no sacred right could restrain ambition when the empire's heart had been exposed and weakened. Vespasian, observing from the periphery, recognized that the greatest threat to Rome was not any foreign army, but the relentless cycle of ambition and betrayal consuming its own people. He saw that the only way to restore the empire was to confront these internal enemies, not merely with force, but with strategy, patience, and the ability to unite fractured loyalties. Every move he made was designed to counteract the destructive power of men who had turned Rome against itself. The year of the four emperors became a testament to the dangers of internal conflict. Four men, each striving for dominion, became embodiments of Rome's worst impulses. Their ambition was limitless, their ruthlessness unrestrained, their cunning unparalleled. And yet, in their quest for power, they also revealed the vulnerability of the empire, the fragility of a city whose strength depended as much on loyalty and honor as on walls and legions. Every faction in Rome sought supremacy through blood, betrayal, and intimidation. Otho's swift coup had shattered the illusion that power could be peacefully transferred. Vitellius's march of legions into the city had demonstrated that military might alone could determine imperial authority. Even the remnants of Galba's rule, though brief, had shown that hesitation and indecision were as deadly as outright ambition. Rome's enemy was not a single man or army. It was the ceaseless hunger for dominance, the willingness to destroy anything and anyone that stood in the way. The citizens endured in fearful silence, watching as their city became a cage of knives and whispers. Each day brought new peril, each night the threat of assassination or looting. Trust, once a pillar of Roman society, was a fragile illusion. Friends turned into foes, brothers in arms became assassins. The eternal city had been transformed into a battlefield where survival, not victory, was the highest goal. In the provinces, the consequences of Rome's internal struggle were equally dire. Legions pledged their swords to those who offered the highest reward, destabilizing distant territories and leaving borders vulnerable. Revolts and unrest flared as news of the civil wars reached far-off provinces, compounding the chaos. The empire, once the envy of the known world, now teetered on collapse, threatened not by barbarians, but by the relentless ambition of men who claimed to protect it. Amid this maelstrom of betrayal, the stage was set for a leader who could rise above the chaos, Vespasian's patient consolidation of loyalty, his careful orchestration of alliances, and his strategic foresight positioned him as the counterbalance to the destructive forces consuming Rome. While the city bled from internal strife, he prepared to confront the greatest enemy the empire had ever known. Not an outsider, but the very ambition of Rome itself. By the end of this year, the Eternal City had endured unparalleled trials. Its streets ran with the blood of citizens and soldiers alike. Its walls echoed with betrayal, and its legions were instruments of both ambition and survival. Rome's greatest enemy was not across its borders. It was within, in the hearts and minds of men willing to sacrifice everything for power. The empire had survived, but only barely, and the question remained, could one man rising from the provinces subdue not only the armies, but the ambition that threatened to devour Rome? In the shadow of Rome's relentless chaos, a figure emerged whose quiet determination would shape the fate of the empire. Vespasian, a general forged in the fires of distant campaigns, did not seek spectacle nor demand immediate adulation. While the Eternal City writhed under the ambitions of 4 emperors, he observed, calculated, and prepared. His was a strategy not of impulsive conquest but of measured restoration, a vision for an empire torn asunder, a plan to reclaim Rome not through fear alone, but through the meticulous cultivation of loyalty and stability. From the provinces of Judea to the legions stationed along the Rhine, Vespasian gathered men who valued order over whim, discipline over indulgence. Unlike Galba, whose rigidity alienated followers, or Otho, whose charm could not mask the recklessness of his ambition, Vespasian offered a promise that resonated deeply with those weary of bloodshed. Rome would endure, and all who fought for her could share in that endurance. His words carried weight not because of grandiosity, but because they were true. Soldiers, administrators, and allies alike recognized the rare clarity of purpose in his vision. Vespasian's approach to power was meticulous. He did not simply march his legions into battle. He wove alliances with provincial governors, secured the loyalty of distant armies, and positioned himself as the embodiment of stability in a time of relentless upheaval. Every letter sent, every envoy dispatched, every strategic appointment was part of a grand design to consolidate authority quietly and efficiently. In a year dominated by impulsive ambition, Vespasian's patience became his most formidable weapon. The citizens of Rome, exhausted by betrayal and bloodshed, sensed the change long before it became visible. While streets remained wary and walls still bore the marks of conflict, whispers of a general who promised security and order began to circulate. Vespasian's influence grew not through spectacle, but through tangible action. Fair treatment of loyal soldiers, strategic rewards for service, and a vision that extended beyond the immediate lust for power. In the eyes of those who had seen Rome nearly collapse under the weight of internal strife, he became a symbol of hope. When the time came to confront Vitellius, whose legions had brought terror and instability to the capital, Vespasian's preparations bore fruit. The confrontation was not merely military, it was ideological, a struggle between chaos and order, between the reckless pursuit of power and the disciplined vision of restoration. Vespasian's forces, disciplined, well-led, and motivated by a sense of purpose, met Vitellius's legions with precision. Each engagement, each maneuver, each decision reflected a deep understanding of the nature of Rome itself and of the fragility that had allowed the empire to teeter on the edge of destruction. The battle for Rome was brutal, yet decisive. Vespasian's legions, unified under a vision greater than immediate gain, overcame Vitellius' forces through superior strategy, coordination, and morale. The streets ran with the echoes of conflict, but in this decisive moment, the Eternal City glimpsed the possibility of recovery. Where ambition had once destroyed, disciplined leadership now offered the promise of renewal. Soldiers who had wavered in loyalty found steadiness under Vespasian's command. Provinces, once destabilized by chaos, now saw the first signs of consistent governance. Yet Vespasian's triumph was not a matter of brute force alone. He understood that the survival of Rome depended on healing the fractures within the empire. Senators who had wavered, Cities that had been neglected and armies torn by divided loyalty were brought into alignment not through fear, but through reassurance, clear policy, and demonstration of fair, consistent leadership. Rome required a leader who could rebuild not only its walls and legions, but its very spirit, and Vespasian embodied that leader. The citizens of the Eternal City, once paralyzed by uncertainty and terror, began to sense the possibility of stability. Markets reopened, temples once again filled with prayer, and families dared to venture beyond barricaded doors. The empire, though scarred, could envision a future beyond mere survival. Vespasian's rise demonstrated that Rome's greatest enemy had been unchecked ambition and internal division, and that the restoration of order required patience, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to the greater good. Even as victory approached, Vespasian moved with caution and wisdom. He did not celebrate prematurely, nor did he underestimate the lingering dangers of internal dissent. Instead, he fortified alliances, ensured the loyalty of key legions, and extended an olive branch to those who had been swept up in the ambitions of Otho, Vitellius, and Galba. By consolidating his power thoughtfully, he created a foundation that would outlast the chaos of a single year and provide a platform for lasting stability. By the close of AD 69, Vespasian had not only defeated Vitellius, but had also established the legitimacy and authority necessary to rebuild Rome from the ruins of its internal conflicts. The Eternal City, though battered and bloodied, was ready to rise from its descent into chaos. What had been a year of relentless instability became, under Vespasian's leadership, a turning point, a moment when careful strategy, disciplined execution, and a vision for restoration triumphed over the reckless pursuit of power. In Vespasian, Rome found not a tyrant, nor a gambler, nor a demagogue, but a leader whose strength lay in patience, understanding, and unwavering purpose. He had navigated a labyrinth of betrayal and ambition, emerging as the force capable of uniting a fractured empire. The legions, the provinces, the Senate, and the citizens of Rome all recognized the arrival of a man who could rebuild what had been broken and secure the Eternal City against the threats not only of the present, but of the future. Thus, from the chaos that had engulfed the empire, a new order began to emerge. The internal enemies, the treacherous generals, the scheming senators, the fractious legions, had been subdued not by the sheer ferocity of battle alone, but by the foresight, patience, and strategic brilliance of Vespasian. Rome, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now saw the glimmer of a century of stability and strength. In the end, the Eternal City learned a lesson carved in blood and forged in the fires of ambition, that true power lies not in the reckless seizure of opportunity, but in the measured restoration of order. Vespasian, the unassuming general from Judea, had become the instrument through which Rome could rise once more. A man whose leadership would transform a year of destruction into the dawn of the Flavian dynasty. The year of turmoil had reached its crescendo, and the Eternal City, once a stage for ambition and bloodshed, now braced for the final act. Vespasian, who had observed, planned, and built alliances with the patience of a master strategist, was ready to strike not merely as a victor of armies, but as the architect of Rome's revival. The streets, soaked with the blood of citizens and soldiers alike, seemed to hold their breath. The empire's fate balanced on a knife's edge, awaiting a hand strong enough to steady it. Vitellius, whose triumph had been as spectacular as it was brutal, now faced the inexorable march of Vespasian's disciplined forces. His once feared legions, hardened in battle yet fatigued by internal divisions, encountered an enemy not only skilled in warfare, but in the art of loyalty and unity. Vespasian's armies advanced with a precision that belied the chaos that had enveloped Rome for so long. Each maneuver, each flank, each strategic positioning spoke of a leader who understood that to restore Rome, he had to win more than battles. He had to restore faith, morale, and the very cohesion of the empire. The confrontation was swift, ruthless, and decisive. Rome itself became both battlefield and witness. Citizens, peering from behind shuttered doors and barricaded gates, saw legions clash not as disparate forces vying for personal gain, but as instruments of a higher purpose. Where ambition had once destroyed, disciplined strategy now prevailed. Vitellius' forces, despite their valor, faltered in the face of Vespasian's calculated precision. The streets ran red once more, yet this time the carnage paved the way not for continued chaos, but for the restoration of order. As the final confrontation reached its climax, Vitellius fell. His defeat was absolute, leaving Vespasian unchallenged in his authority. The city, exhausted by months of internal warfare, finally experienced a moment of relief, a pause in the relentless cycle of blood and betrayal. Rome, battered and bruised, began to sense the dawn of stability. Citizens cautiously emerged from hiding, markets reopened, and the hum of daily life gradually returned to streets that had known only fear. Vespasian's triumph was not merely martial, it was transformative. He moved quickly to consolidate his rule, but with wisdom rather than tyranny. Senators who had plotted, soldiers who had wavered, and cities that had been neglected were brought into alignment with a careful balance of justice and reward. The Flavian dynasty, which would rule for decades, was born not from the arrogance of conquest, but from the meticulous construction of loyalty, trust, and the promise of stability. The eternal city, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now stood on the threshold of renewal. Temples were restored, forums reopened, and the civic life of Rome gradually returned to its rhythm. Vespasian, the general who had begun as an observer of chaos, had become the linchpin of a reunited empire. Where once ambition and betrayal had driven men to turn Rome against itself, leadership and foresight now bound the city and its provinces together. The legions, disciplined and loyal, patrolled not for personal gain, but to safeguard the continuity of the empire. The people of Rome, having endured a year of terror and uncertainty, slowly reclaimed their sense of identity and security. Families reunited, markets flourished, and the cultural heartbeat of the city, suppressed by fear, began to resonate once more. The scars of civil war were visible, yet they served as reminders not only of past suffering, but also of the resilience of an empire that had survived its darkest hours. Vespasian's leadership, unlike that of his predecessors, emphasized endurance over spectacle. He understood that Rome's strength was not in fleeting grandeur, but in sustainable governance. By restoring trust in the army, the Senate, and the provinces, he laid the foundation for decades of stability. The eternal city, once at the mercy of greed and ambition, now felt the steady pulse of order. Rome had survived, not by chance, but through the vision and discipline of a leader who comprehended the fragility of power and the necessity of unity. As the Flavian dynasty was established, the empire turned its gaze outward once more, reclaiming its sense of purpose and confidence. The lessons of the Year of the Four Emperors were etched into memory. Unchecked ambition could devastate even the mightiest empire, but measured leadership, grounded in loyalty and strategy, could restore it from the brink of destruction. Vespasian's victory was not just the triumph of a man, it was the triumph of Rome itself, proving that the eternal city could endure the storms of chaos and emerge stronger than before. In the quiet aftermath, Rome began to heal. The once shattered legions became instruments of defense and stability. The provinces, reassured by consistent governance, flourished, and the citizens, scarred but resilient, embraced the return of order. From the ashes of civil war and ambition arose a Rome renewed, a city that had witnessed its own near destruction and emerged wiser, stronger, and prepared for the trials of the future. Thus ended the Year of the Four Emperors, a year marked by blood, betrayal, and upheaval. Yet from this crucible of chaos rose a leader whose wisdom, patience, and strategic brilliance would reshape the empire for generations. Vespasian had not merely seized power, he had restored the soul of Rome. The eternal city, tested and scarred, now stood firm, ready to face whatever challenges history would bring. And so, from the darkness of internal strife, the light of the Flavian dynasty dawned, promising a century of stability, strength, and renewed glory for the empire that would endure forever as Rome.